Good morning. It's Monday, and we are talking today about Putin's announcement of tactical nuclear drills. These are taking place between Russia and Belarus. And let's look a little bit in the past. From the very beginning of the Russian special operation, Russia has very pointedly reminded NATO that it is a great nuclear power. Now, this wasn't some sort of bluster or bluff. It was a reminder, a very cold reality that NATO seems to have forgotten. The West is playing a game of chicken on the world's most deadly nuclear playground. Now, let's recap a little bit. Since this war has begun, the United States and NATO have worked very closely with Ukraine and helped to assassinate 13 Russian generals early in the war. They're probably more by now. We sank the flagship Moskva. I say we, the West has sunk that flagship. The United States conducted a very complex operation whereby we sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline and destroyed basically the blood vessel feeding the heart of the European economy, which was Germany. We cut off Germany's access to cheap natural gas from Russia and have permanently crippled their economy. We then helped to carry out a drone attack very deep within the nuclear triad of Russia, destroyed some nuclear capable bombers, bombers that weren't just fighter jets, but these were long range strategic nuclear bombers. And we allowed Ukraine to go deep into Russia and destroy these bombers. Recently, Ukraine, and we're not sure how deep the involvement of NATO was, but we know with reasonable certainty that Ukraine orchestrated the massive terror attack on the Moscow concert hall. They killed 137 civilian concert goers. This was they actually have captured some of the assassins who went in there, and they've been doing interrogation since then. Now, most recently, we have President Macron of France issuing a call to arms, not just for France, but for all of Ukraine. And what he has done is he has said, it's time for NATO to send troops. Some have responded and others have not. Lithuania said it would join him. Estonia has. Other countries have sort of given favorable press to his call to arms. And Macron has said that France is willing to send troops. He says they're willing to consider doing it, and there are certainly reports that he has approved 1,000 people from the French Foreign Legion to go in, and another report that 100 of them have already arrived, and 7 of those have been killed. So we do have this call to arms that NATO, not only will they supply vast sums of arms for war against Russia, but now they will actually send their troops. So that's one thing that has really triggered the Kremlin. The other is that David Cameron, who is the foreign minister for Great Britain, has announced that Great Britain is approving strikes using British weapons inside of Russia, not just on the border, but deeper inside of Russia. Now, both of these policies, putting NATO troops into Ukraine, where they'll certainly be involved in battle, and the other thing that says that British weapons can now be used for long-range interdictions inside of Russia. Both of these policies starkly contradict earlier assurances given to Kiev that NATO troops would not go in, and that these long-range weapons would never be used inside of Russia. Now, quite recently, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat, said that Ukraine defeat would likely mean that U.S. troops will fight. And I want to read you his quote. He said, "We can't let Ukraine fall, because if it does, then there is a significant likelihood that America will have to get into the conflict, not simply with our money, but with our service women and our service men." I thought it was a little interesting how he can't help but be totally woke and give dominant credit to the women. I'm going to tell you, women are not fighting the war in Ukraine. Men are fighting, men are dying. Today, Ukraine's lines of defense are trembling. Their manpower is drained. They lack reserves to seal Russian penetrations. And Russia, meanwhile, has massed several large armies for a late spring offensive. They're likely to burst through at some point and do so in a way that will collapse Ukraine's lines. Just this week, Russia has launched a totally new and unexpected offensive against Kharkiv. Now, Kharkiv is the second largest city in Ukraine. It's actually home to a significant part of Ukraine's defense industries, but it's close to the Russian border, just 18 miles away. Now, a lot of the press has been saying, don't get so worried about Kharkiv because it's just a diversion. They're trying to take reserves from other parts of the front. The problem is that there's very little that's defending Kharkiv. So many of the troops have been drawn further south, have been destroyed in the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which was quite bloody and disastrous. And so it doesn't take many troops to move forward against Kharkiv. And right now, the Russians are moving rather rapidly towards Kharkiv, and there's a sense of panic. The general in charge of Kharkiv has been relieved of his command and replaced for failing to have adequate defenses. And the Ukrainian High Command has been forced to move 3 brigades, which is a substantial force. They've moved 3 brigades off of the front lines in the Donbass and moved them north 150 miles. They'll have to travel north to Kharkiv to shore up that very important city. So what's happening is Ukraine's army is severely depleted. Their population is only 1/3 of that of Russia. Russia is having no problem recruiting and building larger and larger forces all the time. So the Ukrainians, they fought very, very heroically, but their lines are stretched to the breaking point, and now their reserves are being pulled out and sent north to Kharkiv. Now, so what will happen? At some point, there'll be a breakthrough on the front. The Russians will exploit it, and the Ukrainians will not be able to seal the gap, And at that point, the entire front line will collapse. Now, the White House knows that Ukraine is falling, but they are determined not to allow the war to end before the November elections, which would be disastrous for Biden. He cannot afford a huge military loss that will expose the debacle that he has carried out. It actually started. This was Obama's folly. This idea of overthrowing the government of Ukraine, building up a big army, attacking towards Russia, and so it would raise too many very awkward questions if we had a collapse of Ukraine. So the White House must keep Ukraine afloat until the November elections. Now, for that reason, they're preparing wildly reckless options for preserving power. They are examining the use of tactical nuclear weapons, or perhaps even using poison gas, as we did during the Iran-Iraq war back in the 80s. These have not been ruled out. Now, Russia is very deeply concerned that the US and NATO will very soon deliver F-16 jet fighters to Ukraine. These are nuclear-capable aircraft. They can carry the B-61 air-dropped gravity bombs, 100 of which are held by the United States in various locations in Europe and in Turkey. Now, these are battlefield tactical nuclear weapons. Some of them you can adjust the yield, so you can diminish the yield so that you can launch a strike on a fairly small area, and you can expand it to where it can be a Hiroshima type of bomb, but very dangerous. Under the Russian nuclear doctrine, they do not conceive of a nuclear war that is limited in scope. And so their doctrine, and the Russians tend to follow doctrine fairly consistently, their doctrine says that the use of tactical nuclear weapons will probably entail a global strategic nuclear response. And keep in mind now there are a substantial number of nuclear capable submarines off the shores of the United States, Great Britain, Europe, and they, on an instant's notice, they can launch up to 100 nuclear missiles, and certainly New York City would be wiped out, Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia would be wiped out. All of the major cities in the United States would be targeted. London would simply disappear. It would be a historical location on the map, and it would probably be so radioactive for 100 years that nothing would ever be built there. Same thing, Berlin would be consumed in a fireball. Paris, Brussels, in Belgium, there wouldn't be anybody left alive in Belgium. So, the introduction of, or the introduction of these F-16 nuclear capable jets are of grave concern to Russia. Russia considers the use of these F-16 fighters to present a clear and present danger to all of the people of Russia. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry has warned NATO countries, each of them individually, not just through NATO, but each country individuals that the Russian army will consider any F-16 fighter in Ukraine a nuclear weapons carrier, and that the jets and their airfields, wherever those airfields are located, will be legitimate targets. Now, keep in mind, it's very likely that the U.S. will stage some of these aircraft perhaps out of places in Germany or Poland or various other places, Romania. And as far as they're concerned, if you have an F-16 that launches from Romania or from somewhere in Poland, then that airfield is a legitimate target for a response. And of course, if there's ever one that actually is detected dropping a nuclear bomb, then it's Katie bar the door. At that point, anything goes, and that may signal the beginning of the nuclear holocaust that eliminates a major part of the population, particularly of the Western countries and their allies. Now, on last Monday, President Putin announced that tactical nuclear weapons exercises will be conducted in response to existential threats to Russia coming from France and the United Kingdom. On the same day, the Russian Foreign Ministry summoned the French and British envoys to Moscow and told them in no uncertain terms that if NATO put boots on the ground in Ukraine, as President Macron has suggested, or if their long-range missiles were used by Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, including Crimea, then Russia will strike back against their bases in Ukraine and beyond. In other words, it's not going to be limited to within the borders of Ukraine. It will apply wherever these activities are coming from. So if France begins doing things, inserting troops and so forth, then it's unclear what will happen at that point. Now, Putin was newly inaugurated as president of Russia on Tuesday, May the 7th. The Russians, there was a tremendous turnout in the election. And what it established is that the Russians are solidly behind him and the war effort. He's in a position of great strength. The industrial base of Russia is growing by leaps and bounds. Their economy is strong and stable. They're having no difficulty recruiting as many troops as they can. And Russia is fully prepared to fight the US and NATO. Now, it's very important that we begin to recognize the danger that all of this poses, particularly when you have someone like the Democrat House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, talking about our sons and daughters, our husbands, our wives, my grandchildren being sent off to fight Obama's Folly on the other side of the globe and potentially to trigger a nuclear war in doing it. Now, we really have to have a wake-up call for the politicians and tell them we are sick of this. The United States is engaged in so many wars in so many places. We're fighting in Gaza. We're fighting in Ukraine. We're fighting in Syria. We're fighting in Iraq. And these clowns want to start a war with China. Let me just tell you for a moment. When we left Vietnam, and I left a lot of blood and a lot of friends in Vietnam, there was this saying that went on for a long time, for a couple of generations later. And it said, "We will never again fight a land war in Asia." Well, take a quick snapshot. We fought 10 years against the people in Vietnam, and the population of Vietnam was a tiny fraction of that of China. China's population is 30 times as great as Vietnam's, and the landmass of China is about 29 times what it is in Vietnam. So think of it. The US, which was at the peak of its power, our military was just the finest military the United States has ever fielded. People don't realize that because they think, okay, 10 years, at the end of 10 years, we were sort of coming unglued at the seams. But we went in there with an extraordinarily powerful, well-disciplined, well-manned military force, well-armed. And we fought for 10 years before giving up the ghost there. Now, imagine if we had to fight against 30 times, a Vietnam army, 30 times what it was. And Vietnam is, if you look at the map of it, it's a slender strip of land that runs along the South China Sea coastal areas. And it's a very narrow slip of land. China, on the other hand, much of it is deep inland. It has land routes to supply it from Russia, from various other countries. It's not reliant on sea power at all. If the entire Chinese Navy were sunk, we still could not defeat China. It's bizarre that in the midst of all of these wars we're fighting, we don't have any ammunition left. We've sent it all to Gaza, to Israel, to bomb the people in Gaza, and we've sent it to Ukraine to bomb the people, the Russian-speaking people on the border with Russia. And now we're out of ammunition. We don't have what it takes. We've sent a lot of vehicles, a tremendous portion of our missiles and so forth. So there's this mad frenzy in Congress. They're so insulated from reality that they just think we can fight the whole world. We can be the world's bully. We don't have to use diplomacy. We don't have to compromise. We just go in and just beat the living daylights out of everybody on the planet. We gotta stop it. We've got to return to sanity in this country. We just can't get away with this anymore. So this is where we stand right now. These tactical nuclear drills being conducted by Russia and Belarus are historically unprecedented. There are strategic nuclear drills that are routinely conducted. Tactical nuclear drills have never been favored by Russia. They don't like the thought of people using them. But at this point, they've said, we got to be prepared, and they're doing it. We better take them seriously. Well, thank you very much. We hope that at some point, the people in Washington will wake up, come to their senses, and I think they should issue everybody in Congress a good stiff dose of Valium so that they'll all just relax and stop thinking of ways to kill the American people and have all of our military slaughtered in these foreign battles. All right, well, thank you very much for being with me. I look forward to seeing you next Monday. This is Senator Black, Focus on the News. See you then.